warm welcome from lovely Glasgow. My name is Tom Hickey. I'm a senior officer with the Pew Charitable Trusts and very pleased to welcome you all this evening and to introduce our fantastic panel. To my left, Minister for Blue Economy and Civil Aviation for the Government of Belize, Minister André Perez. Vice Minister for Oceans and Water for the Government of Costa Rica, Vice Minister Cynthia Barzuna. CEO for Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, Ms. Angelique Popunu. And importantly, our co-host for this evening, Environment Minister for the Government of Seychelles, Minister Flavien Joubert. I am going to attempt to be brief, to extend a warm welcome and just share with you three, I think, key points for this discussion. Today's panel is focused on the amazing work that these three countries have done to incorporate commitments to their coastal wetlands, that is their blue carbon, mangroves and seagrasses within their updated nationally determined contributions. But why did Pew get involved here? Why did Pew get into this space? Nature is a key theme of this COP. We've heard a lot about how arresting and reversing the decline in global biodiversity can make a meaningful contribution to the climate crisis. But while awareness of these climate benefits has grown in recent years, this round of NDCs really marks a very significant moment in how that potential can be translated into action. Many of the first NDCs alluded to the potential of their blue carbon and other nature-based solutions, but very few set out specific and measurable goals to the restoration and protection of those ecosystems that would yield the benefits. And recognizing the potential of NDCs to shift that needle, we sought to support countries that had that ambition, to recognize the potential that NDCs could bring to scale site-based efforts up until a national level. And it's a well-worn cliche, but leadership is best expressed by example, and in the three countries you're going to hear from this evening, you have arguably the strongest and most specific examples of commitments to coastal wetlands in any NDCs. The title of tonight's discussion, Case Studies and Ambition, could not be more appropriate. Secondly, while these NDCs are not only hugely significant for the wetlands within their respective countries, they can be impactful for the broader dialogue around how other nature-based solutions may be put into practice. Coastal wetlands have a triple benefit in addressing climate change. They sequester and store globally significant amounts of carbon, and significantly they do so in a way that is recognized by IPCC methodologies, meaning that commitments to their protection and restoration can form a legitimate component of countries' mitigation policies. They also help coastal communities to adapt to a changing climate, buffering homes from storm surges and increasingly erratic weather patterns. And thirdly, they foster resilience. They protect the fisheries, biodiversity and ecosystem services such as water filtration that underpin coastal economies and livelihoods. And yet, just with mangroves, we've lost more than half of our mangroves globally in the last century. So they have become both symbolic of the wealth of benefits that can be achieved through nature-based solutions, but also of what we're losing. So these ecosystems and the ambition and development of the NDCs you're going to hear about this evening offer templates, I believe, that will help guide the development of further nature-based solutions. Finally, Pew is thrilled to have supported these three countries, and we look forward to working with you on this journey of implementation, as well as expanding our program of work next year to help other similarly ambitious countries. But let me share one key takeaway with you from these first 3 years. Partnerships. Partnerships at every level. High-level government ambition, cross-departmental initiatives such as Belize's Blue Carbon Working Group, with local organizations such as SACAT, TNC, CI, WWF, Island Conservation Society, and many others, with research agencies such as Cartier, the Smithsonian, the Universities of Belize, Seychelles, and Oxford, with convening partners such as the NDC Partnership, who provide a bridge between country ambition and member expertise and capacities. Organizations like Pew, of course, have a role in pushing governments to be more ambitious and to hold that process to account. But we also have a role in enabling that ambition, and these sort of partnerships are at the heart of that. You're going to see a short video now that showcases some of the richness of that work and of those partnerships in these three countries. But let me begin, but also conclude by again thanking you, ministers, for your wonderful leadership.
The conservation and sustainable management of nature is a complicated issue. Nature is complex, so we need to embrace that complexity.
The coastal wetlands provide essential ecosystem services. But what does that mean?
Mangroves and seagrass are very important ecosystems. In fact, we even refer to them as blue carbon ecosystems. Their intricate root systems help to hold the soil together along the coast, thereby preventing erosion and helping to stabilize the land.
The seagrass habitats as well as mangroves are habitats for marine biodiversity, nurseries for many species of fish. They are supporting livelihoods.
They also provide home to many species that tourists are attracted to, the manatees, for example. Seagrass and mangroves provide habitat and feeding grounds for these species.
They are sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, storing them into the soil and locking it, assisting us in combating the impacts of climate change. They're a triple benefits ecosystem.
The policy makers need to be aware that by conserving mangroves, by protecting them and restoring them, the environmental benefits that the country can obtain surpass the investment needed for that.
Belize is a small country with very small amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. Nevertheless, we are endeavoring to be a leader in encouraging other countries to mitigate and to adapt to climate change.
We wanted to make sure that we can increase ambition for protection and restoration of these important ecosystems. And we wanted to do it from a very science-based approach, as well as a very transparent and consultative process.
6.5.
What the country did is work with partners such as World Wildlife Fund, the Pew Charitable Trust, and other NGO and government partners.
We decided to protect and to restore areas that have mangroves. Up to 2025, we will protect 6,000 hectares, and we want to map the amount of seagrasses that we have in our coastal areas, and we want to implement measures in order to protect and to restore seagrass. It is our hope that other countries may look at our example and may follow that example to restore and to protect our blue carbon systems.
When you look at Seychelles, the way the economy works, a lot of the activities we do, they depend on the integrity of the natural environment.
It's absolutely important for the Seychelles to be protecting its mangrove and seagrass ecosystems. The mapping of seagrass across the entire EEZ of the Seychelles, and including doing below-surface carbon stocks assessments, is one ambitious endeavor by a small island developing state.
Oftentimes we talk about protection, but we don't ensure that the beneficiaries understand what we mean by protection and they don't see the benefits of protection.
Things that people do not believe have value are not given a name. There wasn't a Creole word for seagrass. Through this seagrass mapping project, we decided to really go down to the community, to connect the community to international policy making. Through a process of voting for which word would be preferred, we will institutionalize the word for seagrass and hopefully have the word actually integrated into the Creole dictionary.
We know, because of the mapping exercises that the country has done, that although mangroves are protected in the country, they've been lost at a rate of around 14,000 hectares in the last 20 years. There is a very large amount of carbon that's being lost because of that loss in mangrove cover.
Costa Rica ha sido líder en la implementación de algunas de las soluciones basadas en naturaleza en la región, ya que cuenta con una gran trayectoria de mapeo, además de sus áreas silvestres protegidas, de una gran conservación, de medidas de conservación normativa y técnica que le permite darle un seguimiento al cambio de estos ecosistemas.
We're very fortunate in Costa Rica because we were able to match scientific knowledge with political will and institutional capacities to include these conservation, restoration, and sustainable management targets within Costa Rica's NDC.
Organizations like Conservation International, local NGOs, Pew Charitable Trust work together with the government, and that's the important part.
Últimamente se ha reforzado muchísimo lo que es la ciencia ciudadana y también escuchar esa voz ciudadana que ha implementado soluciones ancestrales, ¿verdad?, que han dado muy buenos resultados.
What Costa Rica is doing is just putting forward this important message that restoring, conserving, and bringing communities and, of course, governments and local stakeholders for effective management of these ecosystems is something that every country needs to do.
Just a snapshot of the partnerships that have underpinned some of the work you're going to hear about now. To begin with, I'd like to invite our co-host for the evening, Minister for Environment and the Government of Seychelles, Minister Flavien Joubert.
Thank you. Well, reflections from Seychelles on seagrass. When you look at Seychelles' history in terms of conservation, we've been involved in conservation for a very long time. We're one of the countries that actually started introducing marine protected areas since the 70s. And recently, Seychelles, one of the protected areas, celebrated its 50-year anniversary. And from that, what we've tried to do as a country is to leverage the benefits of those protected areas and bring those benefits to tourism, to fisheries, and to other activities in the country. And I think it has worked, and it has spurred other people to actually come forward and do more conservation action. And it's one of the reasons why Seychelles today is a leader in terms of environmental protection. All those actions that's been done in the past, it's been utilized to actually build greater capacity, to build a greater level of knowledge, and to get things to continue to move forward. Now, when it comes to the seagrass commitments in the NDC, the commitments are quite straightforward. We would like to protect coastal wetlands and seagrass, 50% of coastal wetlands and seagrass by 2025, and 100% by 2030. It sounds as if it's a very daunting task, but from the Seychelles side, given what we've been able to do in the recent past, we think it's something that's feasible. And it's something that we should attempt as a country, because this is one of the big commitments that we can make to the world. One other thing about the protection of seagrass and the activities that are being done with the support of Pew Trust and also SECAT and other partners is that through this activity, we also would like to open up more, increase the level of knowledge, the level of investigation that we do on those species, and also improve the knowledge that we have on those marine habitats. We don't know enough about those marine habitats to understand really what is threatening them and what would affect them in the future. So by mapping them and by actually investigating the composition of those habitats and looking at the relationships and the networks that exist around them, we would also understand the threats to those ecosystems and be able to better preserve them. They exist, of course, they provide resilience in terms of climate, but they also exist as habitats for marine species. And the more we know about them and the more we know about the linkages, the better we can preserve those habitats and also the species that rely on them. So for us, it's an exercise that would deliver on many benefits for the country and many benefits for the natural environment as a whole. And we see it as a noble act that we need to do for the region, for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think, as you say, the legacy that Seychelles has already established in pioneering ocean leadership across its blue bonds, its debt swap, its MSP process is now being continued into the realm of nature-based solutions. And the focus on mapping of seagrass in Seychelles really, I think, has potential for global impact. It is the least understood of the three blue carbon ecosystems: mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes. Vice Minister Bazuna, I wonder if I could invite you to share some remarks on the work in Costa Rica.
Of course, thank you. Well, blue carbon ecosystems must be addressed, for they have essential mitigation and adaptation potential. It is Costa Rica's hope that the international community will take concrete steps to protect these ecosystems, and for parties of the UNFCCC to examine ways to better reflect the contribution of our Earth's natural systems, including the oceans. Costa Rica recognizes that climate change is ocean change, and there is a strong need to integrate the ocean into climate change action. Coastal and islands populations are facing survival challenges because of the rise of sea level, the limited access to coastal and marine resources, basic for their health, economy, and livelihoods. And we need to start talking about coastal wetlands, mangrove, seagrass, and saltmarsh as blue carbon economies that provide 10 times more than, and this is our scientific team is telling us around the world that it really captures 10 times more than forests. So of course, it is important to talk about this and to take actions right away. This will benefit the people and the nature, for is the carbon stored in their roots and soil for centuries to the protection of biodiversity and frontline communities which depend on their healthy function. This really represents a triple win nature-based solution to tackle climate change. Costa Rica is home to significant areas of mangroves and wetlands. On a national scale, Costa Rica is ensuring sustainable management of its coastal ecosystems for their mitigation and adaptation value. We recognize the important role of these ecosystems for their community resilience. In Costa Rica, these coastal ecosystems support our coastal communities for protection as nursery grounds for important commercial species and for ecotourism, promoting food security and sustainable incomes. With regards to the Ndcs, we are one of the few countries that have delivered high ambition commitments. For us, 2020 was a very special and important year. That is when we took action, stepped forward, demonstrating how ocean nature-based solutions can contribute to decarbonizing our economy, improving local livelihoods, and protecting the planet. Among our most ambitious commitments are that by 2022, 30% of our ocean will be under some official protection scheme. The country will protect and conserve 100% of coastal wetlands by 2025. And by 2025 as well, Costa Rica is committed to restore priority coastal wetland areas and explore, of course, innovative conservation financing mechanism, which, as you all know, is very much needed. We do believe that for this, partnerships are essential to implement these commitments that we have included in our NDCs. We also have included in our national decarbonization plan, national wetland policy. This took place 2017 and 2018 till 2030 and 50. And of course, our national biodiversity strategy. Hopefully with this, and of course, national policy for adaptation to climate change, but hopefully with these kind of partnerships, we can establish ways to implement effectively and have the capacity building, the technical cooperation, and active engagement with local communities. For this, I would like to take a minute to thank Pew and Conservation International for supporting us in implementing what has been an excellent opportunity to create benefits for these communities by restoring a lot of wetlands in Costa Rica and by having a very ambitious plan that could be carried on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Minister. I love the term blue carbon economies. I think there's a justifiable focus on the mitigation benefits of these ecosystems. There is too much carbon being emitted from their destruction and too much potential sequestration being lost. But We shouldn't forget that they're nursery grounds for fish species and biodiversity. They prevent sedimentation, they filter water, they buffer storm surges. So I think for those reasons, they've very rightly become a bit of a poster child for nature-based solutions writ large. Minister Perez, I would like to invite you to share some remarks on behalf of Belize.
Thank you very much. And to my colleagues here from Seychelles and from Costa Rica, indeed a pleasure to be here, and a pleasant, very cool good evening here in Glasgow. I take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this event for inviting Belize to highlight its approach in including blue carbon in its national determined contributions. As a small island development state, Belize is continuously confronted with the extremes of climate crisis. Its communities and national economy are threatened by the now prevalent superstorms and the impacts of events such as sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, erratic variability in weather patterns, and warming waters. These threaten our valuable natural assets, such as our coral reef, which is the longest barrier reef in the Western Hemisphere. In addition, they reduce the potential for fish production and other economic sectors products, such as tourism. Sustained droughts and extreme temperatures also negatively impact our crops and livestock. While a relatively minor contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, the government of Belize has outlined goals to mitigate the impacts of our energy, agriculture, waste, and industrial processes and other sectors. We are very proud of our updated nationally determined contributions, which outline targets and efforts to steward, conserve, and restore our natural resources, notably our forests, wetlands, and marine ecosystems. Our Belizean people recognize that tackling climate change and addressing our biodiversity crisis must happen in tandem if we are to be successful to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Our blue carbon mangrove and seagrass ecosystems play important roles as nature-based solutions to climate change with mitigation, adaptation, and resilience co-benefits. Now, these ecosystems sequester and store significant amount of carbon. This results in ameliorated flooding of low-lying areas on the mainland and safeguards frontline communities from climate impacts, allowing to build greater resilience. They are the perfect example of how the protection and restoration of nature can contribute to our shared climate efforts. This can be described as a triple win for Belize, as it contributes to the national carbon sink, offsets sea level rise and coastal erosion, while expanding habitat for biodiverse resources, resulting in a more resilient tourism and aquaculture industry. That is why we have included specific and measurable targets to their conservation and restoration. We will double the existing levels of mangrove protection, with at least a further 6,000 hectares of new protection by 2025, and a further 6,000 hectares by 2030. We will restore at least 2,000 new hectares of mangroves by 2025 and a further 2,000 by 2030. We will assess the climate benefits of Belize's seagrass ecosystem to inform the development of a national seagrass policy. And we will work towards the inclusion of our blue carbon values in our national greenhouse inventory. Now, these efforts speak not only for our commitment to safeguard and restore these vital ecosystems within Belize, but also of our determination to contribute to the shared growing global awareness of the benefits a nature-based solutions can bring. Not only because they provide a triple benefit in addressing climate change, but because their measurable mitigation benefits are recognized by IPCC methodologies and hence suitable for inclusion within climate policy. These ecosystems are at the forefront of the growing awareness of the role that nature protection can play in addressing climate change. These goals are owned by Belizeans. The development of the updated NDC has included broad stakeholders' engagement, including participation of populations most vulnerable to climate impacts. It was also validated through engagement with a technical committee of sector leads, including representation of indigenous people. These are also ambitions built on partnerships working closely with our international and local NGO partners, as well as academia and management institutions. It is my pleasure to highlight to you Belize's continued commitment to our natural resources for people, nature, and the climate. By recuperating and consolidating our natural places and ecosystems, we can secure productive and sustainable fisheries, grow our nature-based tourism sector, and strengthen our natural resilience to climate change. Belize's NDC take the potential of our mangroves and seagrass as nature-based solutions to a higher level. It highlights the growing interest in nature-based solutions that can meaningfully contribute to climate efforts. The government of Belize is committed to working in collaboration with other SIDS member states, and we believe that we can strengthen our collective efforts in meeting the global climate ambitions by sharing valuable experiences and best practices with other states. The 2020-21 NDCs are an important milestones not only for blue carbon coastal wetlands in our climate policy, but for nature-based solutions for the benefit of Belize, our region, and our global community on a whole. Belize and all other Smile Island developing states do not only deserve, but also demand more. Substance over promises, action over talk. I thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Perez. Action over talk. I think many people in the room, we can't all see them virtually, will attest that that is the case. In Belize, while we are all enjoying the lovely temperate climes of Glasgow, there is work underway already in Belize to conduct mapping and carbon coring of those mangrove ecosystems. Angelique, I'm going to turn to you as somebody who, well, wears many hats and does many jobs, often in the fortunate or unenviable position of being between partnerships and working closely with government, and would invite you to share some perspectives on how the partnership in Seychelles has progressed to support the NDCs.
Thank you very much, Tom. And apologize if I go a little bit off your question, but I will address your question. Thank you to the organizers and having the opportunity to really share the stage with three fantastic leaders. And I thank and applaud your leadership. And I hope I'm able to offer some reflections, also based on the interventions I've heard, but yes, very much about the partnerships from the side of SECAT, the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. Indeed, in supporting the government of Seychelles with integrating blue carbon in its NDCs, this was really building on Seychelles' legacy of ocean conservation leadership. We've already heard, and I'm sure it has inspired some at the table even when we've discussed about this, the Seychelles Debt for Nature Swap, the Seychelles Sovereign Blue Bond, and even in the time of COVID, Seychelles pronounced itself. It protected 30% of its exclusive economic zone. And partnerships is critical. For SECAT as a trust fund that was created by a PPP, a public-private partnership, partnerships really is in our DNA. As a trust fund, we are able to connect international aspirations to the ground. The integrating of blue carbon in our NDCs is one such example. How we manage to prepare, how we manage to make preparing climate plans lead to making seagrass an ecosystem talked about in all Seychelles households. From social media to crowdsourcing Creole names for seagrass, we went all out to ensure that people really understood what this commitment made, what this commitment meant, and what it was about for them. Because we know that climate ambition is not just a business of governments. And I know we sit here at negotiations and it sometimes feels like it is. But it's not just a business of governments. It requires an all-country approach. We talked about the need for people. And Minister Perez talked about indigenous people. In the Seychelles, we very much focused on youth. We had seagrass competitions, art and poetry, to get young people engaged about the importance of seagrass, engaging the hotels, businesses, and government, of course. Buy-in is key to ensure that these commitments that are made at these very high-level international policy-making documents are actually implemented on the ground. As SECAT, we've engaged with many, many partners on this, from international friends, district administrators in local government, fishers, universities, you name it, we've probably got a story for you. But I'd like to also commend, and here I think the sentiments have been expressed amongst my fellow panelists. Pew has really provided meaningful partnership. Something different, where we felt that this was not a simple donor-recipient relationship. You were on the journey with us. You embarked on the boat as well, and when we met rough weather, you were here to help paddle. So we thank you for that, and this is really the trajectory and the way that meaningful partnerships should be done. And I want to give a few examples, because this is very important, and at the same time, very much what we're talking about in the negotiations. But let's think about the capacity building elements of this project. And I don't know how many of you use the term, but parachute science was definitely not going to be on the table. This was not going to be about a bunch of consultants from Western countries flying in, telling us how many seagrass meadows we have, and flying out. This had to be a true knowledge transfer. And in both ways, don't get me wrong, this was not only in one direction. We had international experts, local experts sit around a table, discuss, co-design, and see how we were going to do this work. In addition to that, yes, the funding for the equipment to do the work was also part of the budget. Also very critical, because of course the equipment's going to be left behind. So we can continue to use the equipment after the life of the project. And SECAT is never embarrassed to talk about money. That's really our day-to-day work. So of course, it's important to always remember that sustainable financing needs to be part of the discussion. We cannot have a one-off approach, a one-off grant, a one-off donation. We need to think about sustainable financing. The last thing we want is, of course, for our friends to leave. We've got the data on the seagrass. We cannot monitor it, and we don't know the changes. So with this project, sustainable financing has been embedded already, thinking about the policies that we require, the mechanisms that need to be set up, and a lot of thought leadership going into that. And already we're surrounded by countries, and I think your colleague made the point this morning at our event. We needed this to succeed, so we chose the right countries. I think they were absolutely right. I've expressed already the successes of Seychelles, but we also have Belize now with the scaling up of a debt for nature swap in the 300 millions. We have another conservation trust fund that we look to from Seychelles, PACT, the Protected Areas Conservation Trust. We have so many amazing examples for Costa Rica with the payment of ecosystem services. So really the examples that we have here to show that we can build on this leadership. We can build on what's existing, and it's great to have more friends embark on this journey with us. I cannot stress the importance of knowledge sharing. As small states, we need to share the knowledge that we have. Never assume the knowledge that we have, everyone knows. There are many people here who are climate ministers. They do not speak to the ocean affairs minister, only in cabinet for 5 minutes. We should not assume that everybody knows of the interconnectivity, the interrelatedness of ocean and climate. And therefore, as countries, we know better. So we should call on our colleague, well, you should call on your colleague ministers as you meet them in the corridors in this event to share with them the work that you have done. And we share transparently. There may have been lessons learned, so we must share with others so they can improve. Just to end, to say that in 2015, and hopefully to show that the momentum has been achieved, in 2015, academic papers tracked how many countries included ocean in their NDCs. I often attended strategy negotiations and meetings thinking about how to ensure that more countries put ocean in their NDCs. This was back in 2015. And in 2020, the academics are at it again, and early findings show that there are already more countries including ocean in their NDCs. So clearly, this must be because of initiatives that has been supported by Pew, but also the leadership that all of you countries have shown. So I thank you for your leadership and your inspiration for the world, and I hope those on the negotiating lines see and can move things forward and really move away from talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. I'm delighted to be in the boat and happy to keep paddling as needed. I think we discussed earlier today that we make no apology for emphasizing partnerships in this discussion. Not only partnerships in terms of the operation of the projects, but of the inclusivity in the NDC design. And I would like to invite the ministers to maybe reflect a little bit on the importance of that inclusivity in both designing these commitments, but equally going forward in their implementation. Minister Perez.
Of course, I think that what you're highlighting is that it goes, of course, beyond partnership, and it's, of course, all about inclusivity. And I'd like to follow up on what from Angelique had mentioned, is that entrusting, as we spoke about the debt for nature swap and the blue bonds, indeed in the corridors of cabinet that we're talking about, the different ministers, and I'm holding the position as the Minister of the Blue Economy. It's no other than our ministry is entrusted with that responsibility to carry out the agreements that we have done with the debt for nature swap, that we have conservation targets to be met in the next years to come. And none other than the blue economy is entrusted with that responsibility to see that those milestones are met. So we take it very much, very serious. We are very much have laid out a plan already, a strategic 5-year plan that we have in the blue economy. And already 1 year it is yielding results. So how do we include that in terms of inclusivity and partnership? Everybody must be involved. It is not just government. Of course, government must lead. And of course, a responsible government, a government who will have the political will. That is very, very important. I think this morning, I think the Minister from Seychelles highlighted, it must be responsible leadership. That is really key into leading it. And I think our government of the day in Belize stands out clearly in the steps that they have taken, the bold steps that we have taken. And of course, we must involve all stakeholders. We have to be realizing that we are all in this together. And that is democracy. Consultation, everyone there must be included. It's not something that the government is acting unilaterally, but rather we have done the due process of consulting with everyone. And it is becoming all stakeholders. And in the blue economy, I'd like to share that we have created what you call the blue economic cluster, which is basically multi-sectoral, involving government officials, private sector, NGOs, the community, the schools, the academia. We're all getting involved in consulting, and that has been yielding beautiful results that we are implementing. So every time we make decisions, we know that we have made informed decisions. So key, again, as you mentioned, is partnership and inclusivity.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Joubert, I mean, Angelique has touched upon some of the breadth of work, from satellite mapping to engagement with the Institute for Seychelles Creole. How important has inclusivity been in the NDC design?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, Seychelles has been doing quite a lot of work in terms of engaging internally with our different the different entities who've been involved in nature conservation, also development of projects and research. And I think this has been continued under the NDC, where we've seen a lot of groups engage with, a lot of contributions. We've had partnership from externally also. We've had a major consortium helping us with the NDC, as you would see on the document itself. International entities, international experts who's taken up different parts of the NDC and has provided us with the right analysis to help us make realistic policy decisions rather than just ambitious decisions that we cannot implement. So we see partnerships from outside, but also partnerships inside the country. And I think, as has been pointed out by Angelique also, the whole process associated with SECAT and the commitments on the marine environment it has been one big story of partnership between different partners. And also, we see that it is also helping in implementation as we move forward with rolling out those measures, because those partners, they remain committed. Those partners, they help us, they help the government, they help the state implement those measures. For example, on detection of different infractions on the high seas, it's not government that's going out patrolling the entire EEZ, 1.4 million square kilometers. It's mostly partners who are out there, who are keeping an eye on what is going on out in the EEZ. So this partnership should happen at the very beginning. It should help us make proper decisions, but also it should carry on when we get to implementation of our decisions. But one thing I would also like to raise about partnerships is that as countries, we also have to remember that not all countries are equal. Different countries have different capacities, and some countries, they are better able, depending on the level of development, on the people they have, the expertise they have access to, they are better able to access those partnerships and better able to make use of those partnerships and those resources that exist out there. And it's important, us as countries also, to be to show this sort of fraternity, to help not just ourselves, but help each other. We can do that, for example, through regional efforts, where a country that's moving forward, that's moved forward at certain points, you share the knowledge, you share the resources, you share the links that you've been able to establish, just like what Seychelles is doing when it comes to the debt swap and the experience on marine protection, where we are openly offering support to countries that need that support. If they come to us and they say, we want to see what is your experience, we want to understand how things are done, we are ready and willing. And that's that. I think that's one of the most important things. We should not just look at partnership as something between a country and an entity that's got the resources, but between us countries, we should be willing to share and willing to help each other. And in this way, we can actually get the objectives of the global climate agreements to move forward, because we would not be able to move forward if each country is acting alone. We have to be able to make progress, but also share the progress and turn it into global progress and not just individual progress. So that's my reflection. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think if we are and should establish a blue carbon fraternity, it will be extremely well populated very quickly. Vice Minister, within this partnership with your colleague Jacqueline in the Wetlands Department, with Miguel, with our very dear partner from CI, Anna, who no one can see on screen, but she is sat just down here, it strikes us that there were very few corners of Costa Rica that weren't engaged in this process. And that's a lot of work, but seemingly critical to the strength of the commitments that Costa Rica has developed.
Thank you, Tom. It is true. It was hard work, and inclusivity meant it was key. It was key to implement everything that we were committing to, but in order to design the commitments, you need to involve people. And as long as you involve people, and local stakeholders were essential to this involvement, to designing, to have this proposal, this ambitious proposal. It is very important to engage people, to have participation and help from the NGOs. As you mentioned, Ana, Miguel, they've been an essential part of it. And of course, partnerships do make sense. As Angelique was mentioning, it's not only on the political level that you design these commitments, it has to take care of all of its stakeholders. And Jacqueline was mentioning in the video, citizen science. Citizen science is also key in developing exactly what we want. They're living there. They know exactly what they have, and they know how to construct, because they have the solutions. They know how it behaves, they have everything under under their eyes, and they're looking at it every day and noticing if there's any change. So of course, citizen science is essential, inclusivity is essential, and having local stakeholders being a part of it and working together as a partnership makes total sense to accomplish these high ambitions. And I think if we could serve as an example, Belize, Seychelles, and Costa Rica, as Angelique mentioned, we are small countries, but we managed to do so. I know the rest can, so we hope that the rest of the countries can integrate in their NDCs this commitment and start talking. And I wish every cup could be a blue cup from now on, of course.
Thank you, Vice Minister. We have a little bit of time left, so there are a couple of other questions I think we should address. One, I think we've already touched upon this, but as we start to think about implementation, financing is top of the list in many discussions. What is next for each of these respective NDCs? What is in train? What do you feel that is currently there in terms of support, and what is needed to help make these ambitions realized into action? Mr. Perez.
Yes. Certainly, but before you go on to where we discuss about the NDCs, the takeaways, if you want to call it, I've been listening keenly to both the ministers from Seychelles and Costa Rica, and that there's so much that we have in common. And at this point in time, I would like to invite them to join and to share our experiences and to collaborate and in dialogue. It is important that we can lead in that way to show to the world, as small countries that we are, what can be done if we take bold action and a collaborative effort in each country. I would like to join with them so that we can unite and force, a united force for climate justice and change, right? Climate change. So that's something that I've been listening keenly, and I think we have so much in common. I think we should continue that path there. As far as the takeaway, the NDCs, of course, we need to make sure that they're progressive in highlighting nature with robust and measurable targets. That is most important, and they're achievable. And that these NDCs that they're built on in the inclusive approach by all actors on the ground. That is also very much important. That again, it goes back to all of this. In terms of the finance, we could always use the resources that is available there, whether it is in the forms of grant funds, or whether it is in terms of loans. But I believe that it's a call out there to the developing nation, the developed nations, that there's a call for the responsibility, that we have been doing our part as small countries. It is time for them to do more, and that the funds that are being given to our country is being put to good use. You can see the results. It's that money that you have a responsible government that is just spending it in the ways that is not required from them. That is also important. And I think this is a shining example there that more of the mobilization of the resources must come to these countries that do our part. And all countries will follow in line, as Angelique had mentioned, that it is growing. Now, we stand here and if we deserve more, we could always use more. But at this point in time, I believe that more nations, the developed nations, need to do more. And I think the blue cup, I love that word that you use there, is highlighting here. I think today is to make a statement that we are here. I don't want to go as stiff as saying demanding more, but to call out that the world is watching, that there is a responsibility for them to do more, and we expect more from them.
Thank you, Minister Joubert.
Okay, where next with the NDC? From my point of view, one of the key things with plans that have to do with environment and other plans, of course, is one of the main stumbling blocks for those plans is the failure for us to prepare an actionable plan or action plan for those ambitions, and also put in place means of verification and measuring progress under those plans. And we've seen that nationally. I've seen that with some plans. In different contexts, we've seen that in other locations. So I think for the NDC, one of the key things that countries need to be doing, and also that needs to be supported, is for them to bring in that action plan and means of verification. This has to come in. This has to be clear, and all partners, all parties, they have to understand that we have an NDC, we have an ambition to deliver on the NDC. This is what we need to do to get that NDC done within that period of time. If we don't do that, we're not going to get it done. When it comes to resources, of course, like my colleague, I would say we need to get some more money from outside. But there is also the part about mobilizing private finance to contribute to the actions under the NDC. It should not always be just government action. It can be action that changes certain things in the economy, in certain activities, that comes from the private. We just have to facilitate, we have to create the right conditions to make it happen, and then we'll see the impacts and we can measure the impact, and then we can adjust as we go along. But there is that need to get that resource from different angles, from the private, from donor and other sources, and get all of those to work together to deliver on the objectives of the NDC. So I think there are things that can be done when it comes to mobilization of finance. It should not just be about countries going to donors and asking for money under international funding bodies, but we should ask for a complete package that includes different ways of financing the NDC. And in the case of Seychelles, when we look at the NDC, it's very clear that, for example, in energy, it should not be government that is the major investor in energy in the country. We have to create the right conditions, and I'm sure that the private would invest. So there is room for private money and other sources of funding to come in and do their bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Vice Minister, I think from what everyone's seen, the Costa Rican delegation deserve a break after this COP, but I doubt you're going to get it. What's next for the NDC in Costa Rica?
Well, what's next for the NDC is, as you know, Costa Rica is part of the High Ambition Coalition, so we are going strongly with the 30 by 30 protection. We want to protect 30% of our ocean. Our land is 27% by now, so we're very close to that 30%, but we want to be more ambitious in that part. And of course, I think our next actions are going to be towards the ocean. We really need to I think the momentum is critical, is important. We need to work on a model for blue carbon services. We think what we have done, and Angelique mentioned about our system that we developed back in the 80s to recover and reforestation. We want to take that same model and implement it in the ocean. I think it's the right step, and I think Costa Rica will move forward in that direction. And regarding finance, I just want to say quickly, I do agree with my dear colleagues, but these mechanisms must be innovative. I think we need to step them up a bit, and we need to come up with a sort of governance new structure that will create the mechanism that will help us move towards these high goals easier and quicker.
Angelique, from the perspective of a partner, where do you see the work going next?
I mean, from a perspective of the partner, I think, you know, it's interesting how at every COP we say the world is watching. I don't think they ever stop. When we've made these commitments, the world continues to watch. And they continue to ensure that, and that's important, right? It holds governments to account. But at the same time, you have partners to support. And I think at least within the Seychelles NDC, we made sure that we acknowledged the variety of options when it comes to financing. Because I already mentioned before, sustainable financing is going to be very important. But definitely agree with Vice Minister from Costa Rica, it has to be innovative. And as you were speaking, my mind was running. I was thinking, should we have a regional a regional pool that could fund this, or maybe cross-regional. I was already, the wheels were already going. I think there's a lot of thought leadership that needs to go into this, and in complete agreement that and perhaps completely biased as SECAT, as something, a trust fund created by blended finance and very much managing mostly blended finance. But we need to leverage public funds to attract private capital to this space. And there's a lot of work that has already been started. As SECAT, we're already exploring what opportunities are ahead. Because at the end of the day, without the sustainable financing, and I love this quote, conservation without funding is just a conversation. So in order for us to be able to really implement and to be able to implement, we're going to need sustainable financing. And I think really that's what we need to think about next. Let's look at the commitments that we've made. The Seychelles, I know we talked about implementing monitoring programs, making sure we can update our carbon inventories, making sure that these areas by a certain time frames are protected. Let's think about, like the minister from Seychelles said, concrete action plan of how we get there. And the UNFCCC already talks about monitoring, verification, and reporting. So let's lead up. Let's continue to show leadership to the commitments that we've already made.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen who are viewing, we have a extremely esteemed panel who are under a lot of time pressure, and I can assure you the time they've given up this evening is but a fraction of the last 3 years we've asked of them. So we will let them go shortly. I wonder if I could ask one concluding question, though. I think if you were to throw a stick at this COP, and I'm sure we'd be discouraged from doing so, you would hit a conversation about nature. It is everywhere. And I think we have heard a lot tonight about the growing interest about joining the boat or the fraternity. I'm very much open to either. What one piece of advice would you give to countries looking to get on that boat? There are many, many, many countries and partnerships now beginning to think in the same way that Seychelles, Belize, and Costa Rica were 3 years ago. What's your top tip?
I think that I'd like to say that, in terms of leadership, I'm trying to get my mind and listening to the ministers from Seychelles and Costa Rica. It all boils down to strong leadership. And what do we have in common? I can see from our 3 countries here, these tiny countries that we consider ourselves small compared to other of the rest of the world nations, is taking that bold step of leading. And how do you define leadership? Is by taking these steps and following people that you would not go by yourself. That is basically how leadership is described. And it takes small countries like Belize, like Seychelles, like Costa Rica, to take that bold step. Now the world can see what can be done if we all work together. And these are shining beacons of examples that we can, if Belize can do it, if Seychelles can do it, if Costa Rica can do it, then it's high time that the other nations should follow it. The framework has been laid out already. It is working. It's not reinventing the wheel, as they mentioned. And of course, we will take it forward, that we will be strengthening that framework. And that is what we plan to do. So it is a shining example that we want to do. More needs to be done. Absolutely. We need to do more work. But already we have the wheels already turning for climate change, for nature conservancy. All of this is working. And we want to invite everyone, especially for Belize, come to Belize and see it's working. You can come for pleasure, to visit. But again, you can do it in nature base as well.
Thank you. Minister Joubert.
Thank you. I think I would agree with the position that's been stated by my colleague about this strong will by different governments and different states. I would add to that by saying that as a country, in order for you to make progress and to develop or to make better progress in a similar way to Seychelles, Costa Rica, and Belize, the country itself and the leadership have to recognize the issues as part of their problem, not as something that is coming from outside. Because in many cases, and we've seen that in many instances, when it comes to global environmental issues, it's as if we are adopting, I think somebody mentioned parachute. What was it? Parachute science. where things are coming from the outside and it's imposed from the outside. If you have a country where you have habitats and you have livelihoods that depend on certain specific types of habitats and certain specific parameters when it comes to natural resources, as a country, you should act on that. You should not wait for a trend to develop and then say, okay, I'm going to act on it because of that trend that's out there, or maybe there is a funding source linked with that. That should not be it. It should be a recognition by the country, by the leadership, by the population, that there is an issue, be it climate change, be it resource degradation, habitat degradation, resource depletion, anything, water, whatever. They have to act on that issue as if it's their issue, and then turn that into a program that fits with ambitions that actually makes sense to them. And then those ambitions would actually make sense to that country. Because for Seychelles, those ambitions that we've laid out, we're not putting out ambitions because we want to be seen as doing things in a certain way. We have put out those ambitions because they mean a lot to us as a country. They really mean a lot to us. The coral reef mean everything to us, you know. The seagrass and coastal erosion protection of the coastline means everything to us. If we lose the coastline, we lose everything. So those ambitions mean everything to us. So for a country, they have to make sure that when they put forward their ambitions, it is an ambition that reflects them, and it reflects their interest, it reflects the way their world is developing, and the measures that need to be taken to protect that world that they value. So I think that, to me, that's something that's important. Those countries that are here today, maybe they should take a minute out from the discussion, think about themselves, and then come back in again. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Minister.
Thank you. I will tell them that I see this as an opportunity to tackle climate action by looking into ocean-based solutions. It can be done. We have done it. So I would say partnerships are essential, building alliances, capacity building and technical cooperation, of course, and active engagement with local communities is key and essential to having the results that we need. I think actions should be taken right away. I think the time is now. And since these are ocean-based solutions, everyone is entitled and obligated to do so. I would think also that education is key. And we haven't addressed that yet. I would love to address that in the next COP, of course, because we need to know what we have in order to protect it. And that is something that we should, at some point, bring into the discussion, because that will make us all, not only what Angelique was saying, that we should bump into negotiators and tell them what we want, that this will mean that everyone in this world will be a negotiator, and it will be so much easier to achieve our goals. Because, let's face it, we're running out of time. Thank you.
I'd like to first accept the invitation from the Minister of Belize to visit. I thank you. I will be there in December. To your question, very short, the blueprint is here. You've got 3 different models, very similar, but with its own particular circumstances. And I think that's where we start. That would be my top tip. You know, there's nothing to be concerned, scared. The blueprints are there. So that would be my top tip. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. And thank you, ministers, for your time, your leadership, your thought. Thank you to the virtual audience and to the audience that you cannot see. Very pleased to bring this event to a close and wish you a very nice evening.